Welcome to the very first episode of the Injury Desk podcast, powered by MaxWell Nutrition. I'm Spencer Shillstone. I'm an integrated performance specialist. I bridge the performance and medical side of sports. I handle training, recovery, and make sure that the medical team is all on the same page. My background has been working with members of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, overseeing training and recovery both overseas and off of deployment. I've had the honor and privilege of working under my father, Mackie Shillstone, who has worked with over 3,000 professional athletes and teams over his 43-year career, working with teams such as the San Francisco Giants, the St. Louis Blues, as well as working with athletes such as tennis great Serena Williams, Bernard Hopkins, Hall of Famer Peyton Manning, and so many more. I got to be at a lot of those training camps as a kid and through college and in my career, and I could have not learned from a better person than him right here.
I'm very honored to have my son say that, and coming in and taking over from me is just beyond a privilege. It is truly a fulfillment as a father.
Now, I'm an avid fantasy football fan, and what I do is I take my knowledge about sports injuries and I use that to have better picks in the draft, as well as learning who should I be going for in the waiver based off of their risk to injury for their position and their injury history. Now, you did something similar to this ages ago. I shouldn't say ages.
Well, that's all right. You see, he's aging me, and that's okay, because I am aged to that point. But Spencer is correct. It was about 15, maybe 20 years ago that I was approached by Cindy Behrens, who at the time was a sports editor of the Washington Post. But what Spencer's referring to is Cindy Behrens wanted me to team up with the orthopedic surgeon at Camp Lejeune, which is the Marines. And she asked, would we consider doing it separately, analyzing every week the injuries in the NFL for the Washington Post Fantasy League, which was called, ironically, The League. And we would not communicate because she wanted a perspective of taking the athlete either before or after the injury, after rehabilitation, if that was required, and then transitioning back to the field. And then the orthopedic surgeon who had to deal with the issues associated with the contact, which the NFL is basically a train wreck on every play. So it gave me a tremendous insight into how the NFL works, their reporting systems, sometimes how teams will actually try and hide things amongst the reporting, and it gave me that tremendous wherewithal. I went on to do it for another 6 years for my hometown paper here in New Orleans, which was the New Orleans Times-Picayune. So yes, I have been down this path before.
So as you can see, this isn't going to be your typical fantasy football podcast. You're going to have me be able to talk about, how injuries are going to implicate your lineup, who you should be targeting for your waivers. But we also have decades of experience, and I mean decades, from you about how that's going to play over the entire season.
And what's interesting about what Spencer talked about? Spencer mentioned U.S. Army Special Operations Command. And there is, in my experience, and I've worked for so many different teams, NFL teams, amongst hundreds of other teams in every sport. But in the NFL, there's a common denominator between the special operator and the actual player. And it doesn't really make a difference if, in fact, it is on offense and defense. And it's surprise, speed, and violent action. You can't discount it, that the play, the contact is a violent action, and sometimes the player does not get up.
Well, today we're going to be covering 3 different athletes that all had week 1 injuries and how they're going to affect the rest of their teams and the entire season. So we're going to talk about Chiefs wide receiver Xavier Worthy and his impact with Travis Kelce. Xavier Worthy may or may not have said something about Taylor Swift's music that led to Travis Kelce running him over, but he has a dislocated shoulder because of it. We're also going to talk about George Kittle, the #1 tight end in fantasy in 2024, and how his hamstring injury has just put him on the injured reserve list. The last athlete we're going to talk about is Christian McCaffrey, and we're going to see if he's able to take on that high workload all season. Stick around, because when we get to Christian McCaffrey, Mackie's going to walk us through how one injury can lead to other injuries in the body using the body's kinetic chain. Let's first talk about Xavier Worthy. He's in his second season now. He was drafted 32nd overall in the first round, and he's the Chiefs' burner. And what I mean by that is he's the speed guy in the wide receiver room. He's also supposed to be Patrick Mahomes' #1 wide receiver option this year, and he's out with a shoulder dislocation. And so I guess my question for you, the first one is, how is he going to go about playing for the rest of the season? Is he going to have to wear a brace? Adam Schefter reported that they're not looking at surgery.
Well, it's interesting, Spencer. You have to look at the etiology, physiology of a shoulder dislocation. When we talk about a shoulder dislocation, we're referring to the humeral bone in the socket, the glenoid, and we're talking about where it attaches through the scapula on the back of the shoulder. This is very important because we actually have 4 different types of dislocations. So it would be very interesting for those of you that are going to judge Mr. Worthy on his injury to understand where it occurs. The most common one is called the anterior dislocation. And that's when the humerus will pull out, and you see up in the front it moving forward. So you will actually be able to see it. This is the most common. The one that is not that common but can be more devastating, and remember, and I'll explain that in a second, is the posterior. So that means it's coming out where the humeral head is going posterior, so this would be anterior and posterior. And the reason why, when it comes out posteriorly, you can affect the esophagus, and you can have a hoarseness, you can affect the throat, the trachea. So there are some real implications if it's posterior. Now, from what I was able to look at, I don't think that occurred with Mr. Worthy. The other one is what you may find more in linemen, offensive and defensive linemen, because when they get down, they will take a shot down, and that's an inferior, where the humeral head comes out below. So in other words, one's out in the front, most common, one out the back, that's the most problematic, and the one coming down, that's the one that typically you see when they hit shoulder pads or they have major contact. And the point about this is the pain in all of these is extremely intense to begin with. So you will see the player on the sidelines, unless they put him in the tent, you don't see it. He's in initial pain. But what's interesting about that is it subsides. And I will tell you, I actually had an actor that I was contracted to work with for 10 months to prepare for a very big movie part, a very physical movie part, who had a documented 200 shoulder dislocations. 200 that were noted.
How do you even go about living your life with 200 shoulder dislocations?
Well, it's an interesting story, and it's not what we really want to talk about here, but the fact was, what I began to do was a scapula stabilization program. Remember, the scapula sit in the back of the shoulder, all right? So if the shoulder's up here and on the side, the scapulas go like that, so they rotate. So what happens is, if you get what's called a scapula dyskinesis, meaning that it's not moving correctly, so in other words, they should be rotating. As you go forward, it should rotate up, and vice versa. So one side won't rotate, and it freezes, and you'll call it a winging scapula. You could take the person, have them put their hand back, and you could put your hand right in the scapula area. That is a winging scapula, and that is what we worked on. And during the course of the 10 months, we did not have one single dislocation. What's the moral of my story? Mr. Worthy will probably do better, hopefully not needing surgery at all, but given enough time of rest and recuperation, he should get back to his position. Now, he would be at risk if he's continually to get more dislocations, and that will be a problem. I did a cheat sheet of the top 10 injuries in the NFL, and let me just read you, because ironically, this actual injury is number 9 on the most frequent injuries in the NFL. It's AC joint sprain or shoulder dislocation. AC is acromioclavicular. That's just where the shoulders and the humerus come together.
So to ask you the quick question, though, about how this is going to affect Xavier Worthy, would you expect him to have more limited range of motion on being able to catch the deep ball, something that's outside his wingspan, so reach fully outwards?
Well, in the initial phase of this, I would suggest, and if you look at my cheat sheet here, it could be days, and in some cases, depending on the severity, maybe weeks. That's really for surgery. But I think he's going to be able to bounce back. Now, what are they going to do? They could put him in a sling during his downtime, or they could put him in a harness where they put him into some compression.
So reporting says that he will most likely be wearing a harness. So how is that going to limit his range of motion?
Well, the harnesses are specifically designed to give you some range of motion. What they're really designed to do is stabilize that scapula, because as he loses stability, then the shoulder loses control. I think if I'm looking at him and what his risk is, and you have to understand where I come from. I come from a very violent world of professional boxing and from working in special operations, as what Spencer's talked about. So if I'm on the defense and I see that receiver out there and I come up in a man come right up, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit him in the shoulder pads. Because why? Because I'm going to try and see if I can dislocate him again. That sounds brutal, doesn't it? But I'm talking about the fact, surprise, speed, and violent action. The NFL is a violent game. I'm not going to do anything that is not permitted, but I think Mr. Worthy is going to have to be the elusive receiver. The better for him not to be in there chicken fighting with the defensive backs.
See, that actually brings up my next question, though. So Xavier Worthy was drafted as the burner. He ran the fastest 40 time when he was drafted. And you always, growing up, you always told me that the lean is the gas pedal and the arms are the accelerator.
Well, I can tell you how he talks about burners. My team during the NFL Combines a number of years ago helped Dante Stallworth at the time to run the fastest time in his pro day at the University of Tennessee, 4.19, eclipsing Bo Jackson's record. Since that time, he was actually given it credited at a 4.22. He ranks in the top 3. But what Spencer says, the arm's the accelerator, the lean is the gas pedal. But I will tell you also another saying, while speed's impressive, accuracy kills.
But that's about the quarterback and not about him. But do you expect him, because he has this limitation in his shoulder, do you expect him to slow down?
Here's the difference between a college receiver and a pro receiver. The college receiver slows down in the turns. The pro receiver does not slow down in the turns. Why? The quarterback has roughly, and I worked with Peyton Manning on this in his last year, and luckily, with a great defense, went on to play in the Super Bowl. But
and win it.
And win. But the quarterback's got roughly 3 seconds to get the ball off. The receiver has no time to slow down. So remember, that plays over in 3 seconds, statistically. So do I expect him to get through this? I think he's going to be able to get back in the game. I think survival is going to be determined by whether he is elusive enough. He can't have a moment of hesitation. He cannot know where the defense is and whether they're going to move into a cover two or a man coverage. And sitting there, getting in and blocking on that run, the running back coming around the side, and he's in there fighting. If that's my top draft pick, I'd say release and go downfield, because that's when he's going to get in trouble.
So the important thing when you're looking at Xavier Worthy is to see if he still has the ability to separate from the defenders. Now, other waiver wire pickups that you could be looking at are receivers just on the Chiefs alone, Juju Smith-Schuster and Hollywood Brown. Both of them received multiple targets the moment Xavier Worthy was out, and Xavier Worthy is looked at as week to week right now. Other options that you could be looking at on the waiver wire, Quentin Johnson of the Chargers, he finally learned how to catch a ball. He no longer has brick hands, and Justin Herbert was able to get quite a few passes to him. Other people that you could be looking at is Calvin Austin on the Pittsburgh Steelers, because he is now catching footballs from what looks to be the Green Bay Packers Aaron Rodgers and not the Jets Aaron Rodgers. So those are going to be two options that you could look at the waiver. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers is a completely different quarterback. He was awful with the Jets, and I didn't even pick him. I had no expectation to have him, and that's a QB that I'm looking to grab in the waivers. Well, let's go on to talk about our second athlete, and that's going to be George Kittle. George Kittle was the #1 tight end last year. He is now going to be out for multiple weeks. He was just placed on injured reserve as we're filming this podcast. That didn't stop him from getting a touchdown the first game and then putting a baseball cap and cheering on his fellow tight end, Jake Tongs, when he scored a touchdown for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, the 49ers are going to be playing our New Orleans Saints, so we're going to be rooting for the Saints on this one. I don't really think we'll pull it off, but this is going to... How does somebody that picked George Kittle feel comfortable when he comes back from injured reserve? Because keep in mind, most of these people that picked George Kittle probably picked him in the second or third round because he's a premium at tight end. And there's a huge drop-off when it comes to the tight end position in fantasy football afterwards. So it's a hamstring issue. A lot of people have these. It was a non-contact injury. He was not hit. And how comfortable can you be that when he comes back in 4 or 5 weeks that this isn't going to be a nagging thing for the rest of the season?
Well, you see how Spencer passed over that hamstring issue, a strain. I can tell you that the hamstring injury, and I've seen it in baseball. I actually had to write a research paper during my tenure with the San Francisco Giants between 1989 and 99 when our outfielders were succumbing to some hamstring issues. And we adapted to it. And what we found in the NFL, in 2023, the NFL had the fewest number of adjusted games lost to injury. Now, when I did the analysis for the Washington Post, we use man games lost to injury. Here's a comparison. I spent 10 years designing the plans for the St. Louis Blues hockey team. You could expect an injury in a player in practice or in the game, and the labor union in the hockey is very similar to that in the NBA. That is very strong. Practice were limited to 3 hours. And then, of course, you had the game. You could expect an injury every 1,000 hours, man games of practice or of or games. Well, if you take 25 players and you put them on the ice, that's 25 hours toward that 1,000. You put them in 3 hours of practice, that's 75 hours. And what we learned was that we could see, and this is where I'm going to come to the NFL, that there were 30% of the injuries were non-contact. That meant no one got touched. And what it boiled down to in the hockey was the manicuring of the ice, that's the Zamboni operator, manicuring, smoothing the ice, out. And number 2 was the skate sharpener, making sure they did the skate sharpening correctly. And then fatigue. Fatigue was one of the issues. In 2023, the NFL, because of what they did, they prepared players coming in to practice. In other words, in the preseason, they just didn't come on in and let's hit it. They phased them in. And then the other thing they learned was the issue with the right cleats on the right surfaces, grass or
turf.
Or grass or turf. I will tell you that statistically right now, the injuries on the grass and the turf, the most recent data to 2023 says it's equal. So it comes down to the shoes and getting the right cleats on the surface. And that was the problem, what we found back in my tenure with the Giants, 1989 to 99, and what they're seeing now. The number 2 thing was, in the NFL in 2023, they had this is cumulative, 700 fewer adjusted games lost to injury. And what was the number 1 cause of injury? And meaning the number 1 cause of keeping the players out of the game? Soft tissue injuries. Now we come forward, the hamstring, one of the most debilitating in the NFL. It ranks on my cheat sheet, I've got number 3. The hamstring typical return to play can be days to several weeks. They're graded in 1 and 2, which is more along the line of a strain, and then grade 3, which could be a real tear that might, in certain cases, require surgery. The hamstring is composed of multiple parts: the semimembranosa, semitendinosa, and the bicep femoris. That's the belly of the back of the muscle. 70%, Spencer, of your hamstring injuries occur in the belly of the muscle. One of the most devastating is the one up in the top of the butt, where the hamstring comes in and attaches at what's called the ischial tuberosity. And what's interesting enough, you know, if you sit down, you compress it. So people that get this, and I've been through it multiple times with athletes, don't like to sit down because you get a wearing away the tendons. Now, I can tell you, just a grade 1 or grade 2, if it's attached up in the butt, can be as short as maybe 1 month, but maybe 3 months. If in fact you get a grade 3 and it requires surgery, you're talking 6 months out. So typically a hamstring strain, the number 1 reason why it's one of the most often re-injured body parts is because the teams bring the player back too quickly. And what you get when you get these injuries in the back of in the hamstring, because the fibers are so connected and because they connect over in the adductor, and let me take you to Mr. Willis? Kittle. Let me take you to here. In 2022, he had a groin injury. He missed 1 to 2 weeks with this, returned in week 3, played on, had a career game. Well, what you have to learn with a hamstring is that hamstring and that adductor, your groin, attach. And that sometimes is missed. What is assumed to be a hamstring injury is actually the groin and the insertion point. So the hamstring is a very complex animal. It requires rest and rehabilitation. Your physical therapists and athletic trainers do a great job, but if he comes back too soon, he re-injures it again, that's going to be a problem.
And that's something to really think about when it comes to George Kittle, because he has come back every single time. He hasn't missed that many games in his career, and that could be an issue because he could come back a little too soon because he personally thinks that he's ready and end up actually injuring it further. So he is, when he comes back, still a high-risk player to use. No matter what, he is still possibly my favorite tight end to watch play. He is somebody that absolutely loves the sport, and when you watch a guy smile like him or smile like Taysom Hill when they take a hit, you know that you have a great athlete right there.
Keep in mind also that I'm looking at one of my other summaries, that in 2021, he had a calf injury, and it was severe enough to put him on the IR on October 9th.
That was actually the only time that he's been on injured reserve. All the
Right,
other
and he came
years-
back on November 2nd, November 6th, so it's just a little bit less than a full month, and he went on to play without further injury. So keep in mind, this is like a scorecard, and if I tell you one thing when you look at your players and you're going to make an adjustment, the scorecard is the injury history, and on which side of the body does it come. And as these injuries mount up, remember, we as human beings have a chronological age. That's the age that we're given at birth. We have a health age. That's what goes on inside the human body. And I will tell you, the physical, the play in the NFL, is not a physical you want to live your life by.
No,
because it's only meant for a short period of time. And the third age is a performance age. So these cumulative injuries that you see in Mr. Kittle are going to shorten his performance age. And there's only a number of times where he will get back to being resilient. And so you want to continue to watch him. And if these little nagging things keep coming up, and that hamstring injury is going to be a nagging problem, I want you to look upstream into the hip, and into the groin again, and I want you to look downstream into the calf. Remember, he's already been there. And so now, if it's on the same side, I'm down low in the calf. And if it's up high up deep in the adductor in the groin, that's up high. And now the hamstring, that's in between. Beware. The injury bug is going to find you again.
So people that you should be looking at for the tight end position after week 1, you could be looking at Brenton Strange, Tyler Warren, who's the rookie, or Jonnu Smith. The three of them had good games for a tight end. And if needed, you might have to look at somebody in your league and offer a trade because, like I said, the tight end position is very limited on tight ends that actually perform. Before we move on, let me tell you about MaxWell Nutrition Unlimited. This is an app where you can get 5 different programs ranging from weight loss, functional fitness, and sports performance. You're able to track your nutrition, follow hundreds of different recipes, and you get access to over 350 Les Mills video workouts, so you can work out at home or in the gym. As a member of MaxWell Nutrition Unlimited, we're doing a founding special for $250. You're going to get lifetime membership. This is something that's going to be the annual price, but for the first 500 people, we're going to be doing a lifetime membership. And you want to lock in on this opportunity because it's going to be $250 a year or $40 a month otherwise. You're not going to find value anywhere else, and you're not going to get insights from people like myself or Mackie on any other app. Now, I want to talk about the most divisive athlete right now, Christian McCaffrey. He is always questioned before the season even started. Will he get hurt? Won't he get hurt? Which Christian McCaffrey are you going to get? Now, he was a first-round pick across the board for everybody. I personally stayed away from him in every single draft that I did. And, it's a risk that you're going to take. Now, week 1, he was Christian McCaffrey of old. He did a phenomenal job. He had a heavy workload, but he has an extensive injury history. Not just on one side of the body, he has injury history in his upper body, his lower body, some are contact injuries, and you can't stop a contact injury, but a lot of this is non-contact injuries. And really, my question is, can you trust him to be like this all season, or should we really be investing in somebody else?
Well, a little bit of background on that question. I had a chance, as I've talked about, to work with Peyton Manning in his last year to help him make a decision to whether to go on and play that last year with Denver. And of course he did, and he went on to the Super Bowl. And he had, and I don't really talk about players' injuries per se other than what's published, He did have a number of injuries. I also helped David Garrard, the quarterback at Jacksonville, in his when he was in my NFL draft preparation program, and then I also helped Patrick Ramsey go from a first-round draft pick from a sixth-round draft pick at Tulane to go to a first-round draft pick. He played 10 years. Mr. McCaffrey is an interesting animal because he does show what Spencer talks about. He reminds me in some way in terms of the Saints when they picked Derek Carr. And Derek Carr,
That's really not a good comparison. You don't want to be compared to Derek Carr.
Well, what I'm talking about, I'm talking only about, remember, about the injuries. I found Derek Carr to be a very brittle player. Now, keep in mind, the quarterback, is a protected species. And I've worked on so many defensive linemen, some of which have knocked the quarterbacks down and out of the game, and with all legal hits. Remember, anytime you can get that quarterback out of that pocket and he's running away and in that pocket, he's protected by that referee. But the minute he goes outside that pocket, he's open game, open season. And that's a great thing for a defensive player to take a shot on him. Now, legally, of course, let's look at this man's history because I want to remind you of what I said about the Mr. Kittle. And I talked about the fact that he's compounding injury after injury, and eventually the specter is going to come calling, all right? And so
Christian McCaffrey, his first 3 seasons with the Carolina Panthers, he was injury-free. And the moment he had his first injury, that's when it started to cascade each and every season after that.
Yeah, but let's take a look. Listen, I have my cheat sheet on my computer here. Christian McCaffrey in 2020, high ankle sprain, all right? And I want you to remind me to say something about that ankle sprain, all right? Because we may have a pattern here you need to know about. He returned, placed on the IR, returned in week 9, but suffered a shoulder injury, all right. So
now, that shoulder injury was a contact injury.
We're right. The shoulder doesn't bother me, okay? Then in 2022, non-significant injuries, did okay from the full schedule of injuries. In 2023, missed only week 18 during a playoff. In 2024, here we come again with the calf injury, placed on the IR, missed weeks 1 through 9, returned in week 10. Now, here's something else. He suffered a PCL, a posterior cruciate ligament injury, in week 13, back on the IR. Question I have to ask, was it in the same calf, on the same leg, lower extremity, that he was injured in one of his early seasons? Was it again the same injury in 2024? And was the PCL, the posterior cruciate ligament? Why do I say that? The posterior cruciate ligament injury, we saw it in hockey. It's not that common. It's when the hockey player runs into the side of the pipes from the net, they'll skate in and get pushed into it. It's from a full contact on the knee, and it drives the knee into hyperextension. The idea behind that is it typically is recovered without surgery. Unlike its counterpart on the backside, the anterior cruciate ligament, that when you rip that, tear that, that's going to require most of the time surgery. But the PCL requires a counterbalance, and this is what I want you to remember. If I want to help protect my posterior cruciate ligament, I've got to have a strong quad. If I want to protect my anterior cruciate ligament back here, if I have a PCL, I want the quad. If I have the ACL, anterior cruciate ligament, I'm confusing my ligaments. I want to have hamstring. So with this PCL, you're seeing the need with the calf, because the calf is composed of the gastrocnemius and the soleus, located on the front side. So here we come on the posterior cruciate and then on the calf. So this is the kinetic chain. And on the ankle, 10% to 20% of your recurrent ankle sprains will become chronic ankle instability. And that is a problem because it now becomes a neurological effect, the brain and the ankle. And that is why it requires a therapist that specializes in vestibular, the neurological connection between the brain and the muscle, because when that chronic ankle instability is there, then you could be having it again and again and again. So the question I will ask, and what you need to be aware of, the injuries that he has had most recently, what side are they on? Because that PCL injury, posterior, may play into it. Secondly, if he starts to have another ankle injury, I think it's important to have him ruled out for chronic ankle instability because this will be an ongoing problem.
So with Christian McCaffrey, you should expect to see him each and every week basically on that injury report. But the question is, can you trust to even always put him in? Now, when you look at his stuff, and if you can watch him on social media, you can see he does a lot of proprioceptive training. He focuses a lot on that balance, that stability, and understanding where his body is in space. So that is that vestibular training that you're talking about. So if you know that this is an athlete that takes this serious, because you have other athletes that have their egos, they don't put in the work, they just have the talent. Christian McCaffrey is the type of athlete who's going to put in the work. Knowing that about who he is, do you have better trust in always putting him in, being a set it and forget it type of athlete?
Well, I think you have to plan on putting him in because he's your starting, running back. He's got the record to run the ball, and he's got the record with the receiving. So you definitely got to put him in. That's why you have multiple running backs on, and you'll probably talk about who his backup is. Mm-hmm. But the thing that you cannot get away from is your injury history. It's going to haunt you at some point. So there are certain players over time, as we would say, this player is the, and I'm not saying this is Christian McCaffrey, but there is a stigma that there are certain players that are going to get a general manager fired. And in my 43 years of working for teams across the board in all sports and the athletes, you have to think about this. Players are interchangeable, Spencer. Mm-hmm. Coaches are expendable. But if you want to change in the organization's philosophy, you got to replace the general manager. And you might as well look at the fact this guy is an asset. Part of my training is my MBA, my Master's in Business Administration, because the minute you recruit someone, they're a big asset. The minute you sign them and you put them on your balance sheet, they become a liability. Mm-hmm. So remember, on the asset and the liability statement, how many injuries, how many weeks out are they? What's the return on investment? And eventually, the running back is going to do themselves in, because my rule to my defensive players is on every play, when you get a chance to hit that running back or quarterback, it's like the shark. They're going to nudge you and then take a piece of you. And they're going to keep hitting you, and then the big hit comes. Eventually, I tell my guys, take a piece of them every time. Make them suffer on defense. Hit them hard enough. And before long, when you slow them down and you get them so they're not themselves, that's when they'll be finished.
So the San Francisco 49ers are going to be dealing with the fact that not only did George Kittle go out with a hamstring injury and he's now an injured reserve, but Juwan Jennings, their other receiver, is injured. Then you have Christian McCaffrey, who's always going to be an injury risk. You have Brandon Ayuk still out. And now we have just learned that Brock Purdy, their quarterback, has an injury to both the foot and the toe. That now means that more of that offense is going to be coming through Christian McCaffrey and the run game, because they have to rely on Mac Jones if Brock Purdy can't play. recommendation in fantasy-wise, I really hope if you drafted Christian McCaffrey that you also got his handcuff Brian Robinson Jr. because he is probably going to see some workload go his way if they got to lean even heavier on the run game. For my question for you, and this is going to be the final question, what kind of training, if somebody watching this that's dealt with an ankle injury in the past, what kind of training could they do for themselves to really get back their mobility in their ankle, make sure that they don't have any injuries coming up again? What could somebody do?
If you've kept up with what I've been saying, you're going to see a recurring trend, and that is, Spencer said, what are you going to do with someone with an ankle injury, to use that as an example? One of the first places I'm going to go is up to the hip. And you say, well, wait a minute, it's an ankle injury. And my point to you is, when you start to see the ankle, you've got to go up the kinetic chain all the way up to the hip, because there could be something, a dysfunction in the hip that's changing your biomechanics on one side. And what you want to look for, and when you talk about the training, is the minute you hear one of the sportscasters or the play-by-play person, even the color commentators say, it looks like he's favoring one side. That's a dead giveaway to what I'm talking about. Don't just look at the ankle, if that's what we're going to pick on, or don't just look at the knee, or don't just look at the hip. Those individual injuries may be a symptom of a problem either below or above. And I can tell you, I saw this extensively in my work with Serena Williams and working with female athletes. Now, granted, we're not talking about female athletes here, but you do get an appreciation that, the toe bone's connected to the leg bone and the leg bone's connected to, up the old, as the old song goes. And I think you're going to have to bring in the neurological component for the ankle. You have to assume and anticipate, you talk about your work with the U.S. Special Operations Command. Before they go on a mission, a target, whatever, they've already done an assessment of what is the enemy strength, where are they located, what type of weapons do they have, and that's what you're going to have to look at when you're looking at any of these injuries. The physical therapist, the athletic trainer, the medical doctor, but specifically the people in the front lines, and it's really going to be the physical therapist, because the athletic trainer, I've worked with so many of them, they have their hands full, especially during the season, that they got to pass it off to the physical therapist or the strength and conditioning coach in certain areas, that it is going to become a concerted effort, and you have to anticipate what could be coming ahead. So looking at just that injury is myopic, nearsighted, and you won't see the punch that's coming.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, if you're looking at something like that's an ankle injury or even at the knee, talking about the work that I've done with Special Operations Command, these guys are always wearing vests. They have different change in their center of gravity, whether they're working with their kits on or off. It's the same thing when you look at an NFL player, because they're wearing pads, they're wearing helmets. That changes the center of gravity versus when they're playing and practicing with all of that and practicing without it. And the key thing that I work with my athletes is we work on that balance and stability both with and without that change in center of gravity. And that's going to be something that, for your own sake, if you have an injury like that you could be trying to work on as well.
Well, and I'll add, he used a very important point, stability. In a global perspective, you stabilize so you can mobilize. Mm-hmm. So if I am going to stabilize one part of my body, it will allow me to mobilize in another part. If I'm a throwing or overhead athlete, I'm going to stabilize my scapulas so I can throw forward, throw a football forward, hit a tennis ball forward, punch forward. And then remember, if you do any of those things forward, you must train in reverse. Mm-hmm. And probably the mode of training that's effective for the hamstring and all of these injuries is what's called eccentric or negative training, is some of the strength coaches use that. But the reality is it's elongating the muscle through a range of motion. And remember, as I punch forward the tricep, I'm elongating the bicep. As I pull back, I'm contracting the bicep, I'm elongating. That's called agonist-antagonist training.
And just to clarify for everybody, another example of an eccentric is when you're doing a squat, as you're going down, that is the eccentric portion of a squat exercise. And when you rise back up, that's the concentric.
And how you would do that in a rehab, if I had the squat, depending on whether I'm going to do a squat holding kettlebells or dumbbells, or if I'm going to put it across my shoulder blades, if I was doing eccentric training, I would have two partners, if I'm going to put it in a traditional manner, that the plates are, whether, I always love using an easy curl bar because it shortens the center of gravity. The Olympic bars forced something that isn't really relevant to many of the games that especially maybe in football. But if I was going to do that, I would squat down on a 4 count, and then I'd have my spotters take it off me, and I'd stand back up under no resistance. Mm-hmm. So if I'm on a leg curl machine, I'm going to lift with 2 and then decelerate with 1. Lift with 2, decelerate with the other. Meaning
Meaning you're going to extend and then go down with one leg.
Right. And you're alternating the coming back, elongate. Remember, when I pull in on the leg curl, I'm contracting the hamstring, which is not only a knee flexor at the knee, but it's a hip extensor. So that's how everything works together synergistically. And all an injury has to do is do one thing, destabilize you. And then the game completely changes. Why do you think the quarterback calling up at the line of scrimmage, Peyton Manning was a master of that, changing the play? Because he sees what the defense is rolled into, and what does he want to do? He says, I'm going to destabilize the defense. That is all sports is. Stabilize, mobilize, and stability, and destabilize. Mm-hmm. That's all it is in simplistic terms.
So just to recap, when we look at these 3 athletes, Xavier Worthy, hit this dislocated shoulder is going to affect his range of motion. It's going to prevent him from being able to reach out and get those deep contested balls, but his speed can also be affected by this injury. George Kittle with his hamstring strain, expect him probably back in 4 to 5 weeks, but if he does come back, he has a greater risk of re-injury. And then finally with Christian McCaffrey, he just had 31 carries and receptions combined in the first week. Just remember, every single one of those snaps, he's got a greater risk of injury.
Here's a comparison, and we can end maybe on this. If you take a look at that hamstring, if you come back too quick, you've got a 35% chance of re-injuring. If you take a look at the anterior cruciate ligament tear, only 55% of the people that have that in the professional world come back to their true form.
Yeah.
And ironically, there is a statistically high injury rate on the non-contact side. It just seems to happen. And I can tell you, I've seen it in some of my athletes, especially one female soccer player and one male soccer player. And I saw a male soccer player that got one ACL, had rehab, was great, and then the next one went. That's because everything runs through the hips.
And that's something that I've actually seen with my own athletes. They spend so much time in physical therapy working on the injured leg that they don't pay attention to take care of the other side. So anything you do on one side of the body, make sure you do balance and build it on the other side as well. Otherwise, you're going to have an increased risk of injury on that other side of the body.
And remember, Spencer Special Operators, losing is not an option. You could come home in a body bag. Losing in a game, being injured, I'm going to get my paycheck. I'm going to play out my injury, get back on the field as quickly and as healthily, as safely as I can, but I come back to run or catch or throw again. That's the difference by what you learn with these the U.S. Army Operations Command. Losing just is not an option.
Well, that's the Injury Desk podcast for you. You're going to have Mackie and I give you real-world insights on how these injuries affect these players and how they can affect your lineup. We'll also give you an idea of who you could be looking at on the waiver system as well. Each and every week, we're going to recap all the injuries that are prominent in the leagues.
See you next time.